And we will move on to the session one. Before we move on to the session one, please give us 5 minutes for the stage setup. Thank you. For the session one of the International Trade and Health Conference 2024, the topic for today is current and future international trade and health, its landscape and its contribution to sustainable development. This session, we will discuss the current trade issues related to health, such as addressing climate change and human health, and also technology disruption. We also talk about the cooperation and synergies between trade and health at all levels. We also talk about the preparation for the pandemic responses as we face the COVID-19 in the last 2 years ago, covering issues such as the need for the pandemic agreement, WTO ministerial declaration, and technical barriers of trade. And also the ongoing discussion in various forums on the current and future trade issues as well. And we also talk about the future, what is missing in the current landscape of the trade issues, as mentioned above. To provide us with more details, may I please introduce the panelists and moderators of this session. Please welcome the moderator of the session, Mr. Suwit Mankala, Deputy Director General, Department of Asian Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to the stage. Please welcome.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is very well, both in terms of health and in terms of wealth, because we are talking about trade and health and how they are related. It is a very important issue. This is the first session of the day, of the conference, in fact, after a very short keynote speaker important message just now that we need to continue to discuss about the relationship between trade and health. So without much further ado, I would try to speak less because we have honorable panelists who will be joining me in this session. Let me try to introduce one by one, but by doing so, I start by inviting all of you on the stage to take your seats. Please, my honorable panelists, please come to the stage. Please. Okay, can I have a round of applause for all the speakers here? Just to, make everyone awake and make sure that we are going to have a very interactive session this morning. Okay, let me start by introducing the first speaker on my right, immediate right here. Her Excellency, Mrs. Pimchanok Pitfield, Ambassador, Permanent Representative of Thailand to the World Trade Organization and the World Intellectual Property Organization. Her Excellency, Mrs. Pimchanok, too long, but let me try to, I'm not going to read everything, but a short introduction. She's the ambassador in Geneva, of course, representing Thailand. For how many years have you been in Geneva, Mom?
Been in Geneva for 3.5 years as ambassador.
Okay, and still going on.
Hopefully.
Okay. Prior to her posting in Geneva, she was the Director General of the Trade Policy and Strategy Office, TPSO, at the Ministry of Commerce in Thailand between 2015 and 2020. TPSO was established in 2015 to be the think tank agency of the MOC, the Ministry of Commerce, with Ms. Pimchinok, the person here, leading the office since the beginning and steering it to become one of the leading and respected economic agencies in Thailand today. Uh, Another important point of your CV is that your early career was focused on the trade negotiations, particularly on services, investment, sustainable development, and e-commerce. So this fits very well with our theme of the first session today, which we will be talking about the current and future international trade and health, its landscape, and its contribution to sustainable development. So this is Ms. Pimchinok, Her Excellency Ambassador of Thailand in Geneva. My second speaker is Mr. Roger Kampf. Mr. Roger Kampf is from Hamburg, Germany. He joined the World Trade Organization in May 2004 and works as counselor in the intellectual property, government procurement, and competition division. Mr. Kampf is responsible for the Secretariat's work in the area of TRIPS and public health and IP enforcement. He also serves the division's technical assistant activities in relation to intellectual property. From 2016 to 2018, Mr. Kampf has been the Secretary of the Council for TRIPS. And from earlier, from 1998 to 2004, he worked for the European Commission at its headquarters in Brussels and at the permanent representation in Geneva. So you are from Germany, but you also very keen on the IP issue as well. I think that's the main focus of your talk today. So welcome, Mr. Kampf. Third speaker, Dr. Manisha Shurcha. We've been together last year. We were together in this same kind of session for this conference as well. She's a regional advisor, WHO Southeast Asia Regional Office. She is the technical head lead since 2009 in WHO Zero for intellectual property rights, IPRs, regulation, trade, including legal issues in communicable diseases, pandemic influenza, preparedness framework, traditional medicines, international health regulations, non-communicable diseases, tobacco control, and nutrition in public health. I think you've done everything, ma'am, to cover. Prior to joining WHO, Doctor served for more than 25 years in Indian administrative service and has worked at many senior positions in the government of India. So welcome to the session, ma'am. Last but not least, our speaker from Thailand, I believe, and he's from the private sector. Dr. Prong Sapto Kapom, Senior Director, Chief of Staff, Lumentum International Thailand Limited. Dr. Prong is the Chief of Staff at the Lumentum Thailand, overseeing all operations and corp programs, range from the diversity, inclusion, and belonging program, the sustainability programs, which is the focus of today's session as well, sustainability, the CSR and GHG programs. He also leads organization to win the Prime Minister's Industrial Award in quality, productivity, and potential industrial categories. So welcome, Dr. Prong. Now, without further ado, and with a brief introduction, I think we have a lot of things to discuss this morning. I will kick off by inviting Her Excellency Mrs. Pimchinok to give us an overview of what's happening right now in terms of the relation between trade and health. And I think she's going to focus her talk on the mega trends. So let us step back and try to set the scene and see how we're going to pursue our discussion this morning on trade and health.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And once again, okay, I can't say once again because I haven't thanked today's audience and the organizer yet. But this is my probably the third time that I'm participating in the international conference in person. So I always looking forward to coming here every year because this topic has been with me since I started. FTA and WTO negotiations almost 30 years ago. So I've been mostly the services negotiator. But in recent years, I have branched out to do some work on intellectual property in Geneva as well. So it's always a pleasure to be back here in this forum. Thanks to Dr. Sampan, Dr. Suvit, and Dr. Chaem, my partners, the organizers. I think when I look at the topic that we were supposed to discuss in session 1, it is quite broad, and I was very worried whether I will be able to cover everything. But luckily, this morning, I came before I came down for breakfast. I saw emails from Roger and from Dr. Prong. Telling us what they were going to speak about, and so it gave me quite a relief because I think they plan to speak in details about some of the topics, including trade in goods, regulations, and intellectual property. So I think that for me, I would like to Dr. Suvit Jr. here, not Dr. Suvit from Public Health. Yeah, sorry. That I would like to speak from a broader perspective and take a step back from, focusing the question of trade and health on COVID or from FTA, because I think the first message that I would like to share is that health is a very, very important and broad, big sector that touches on many aspects. So when we talk about or we think about the mega trends that are affecting many economic activities in the world today, we can relate many of the factors on the development of health sector. For me, there are 5 important trends that have relations on development of health sector in general. Of course, the first one is that there is a possibility of another global pandemic yet. That might come again, but we should think about this is not only in terms of another COVID or another disease, but there could be a global crisis. So this is, of course, if there's a crisis hitting the world again, then health is going to be one thing that is very important. In Thailand, we can think about the floods in Chiang Rai recently, or just right now what is going on in Spain, the heavy flood from climate change, that healthcare of the people or the well-being will be very affected by this. Second issue that I want to mention is the fragmentation of international politics, or what we normally call geopolitics. For me, the challenge that this will pose on the health and as a public sector is the risk of cooperation may break down. If several big countries don't talk together, or the lots of world conflicts or war going on around the world, this could disrupt not only production supply chain for us who are in the trade community. We are very concerned, but it also will disrupt multilateral cooperation and spirits, which is very, very important if we have to address a global disease or global event again. Global problem requires global and multilateral cooperation, but the fragmentation of the world is going on, which tomorrow we're going to know who is going to be the president of the United States. It will be very key development of the direction of a policy that a major country can dictate. So That's the second thing. The third trend, of course, that we cannot speak when we think about SDG is, of course, climate change. For me, maybe climate change has indirect impact on healthcare, but the important thing is that climate change affect food security issue, for example, and following food security or insecurity, you have to address issues like malnutrition or poverty in many countries, which is an impact of climate change and some other things. And the fourth one is the digital and technological development trend. Okay, I can't, I don't have to go into detail. People know about AI and stuff, but it will have positive and possibly challenges for the healthcare sector as a whole. For you can develop faster telemedicine, which is another way to address the patients, but at the same time, you have complications of AI and stuff, which can be harnessed to address health problem, but how to do it. And for developing countries, I always think about the technological gap between developed and developing countries in using or accessing the technology that will be vital for future healthcare sector development. So the digital and technology are here, but not all countries have equal access and finance to do it, to use it properly. And last but not least, in my view, is the aging society or demographic change. I haven't heard people talking about this much when you think about trade and health, but for me, this is very, very important. And again, this is a challenge as well as an opportunity. Challenge is, of course, that we may not have enough personnel, people, not enough doctors, nurses, technicians, researchers in healthcare to address on the one hand, global crisis, and on the other hand, a long-term development of graying or silver economy, as we call it. For me, this is an opportunity for developing countries. But again, if you don't develop enough personnel or not fast enough, we may risk losing the brain drain, like Dr. Suwit was very worried when we were young. So, but again, I look at this as a positive factor. So before I give the floor to the next speakers, I would just say now that another thing that worries me that when people talk about trade and health, they start thinking about FTA negotiations and then the COVID. But no, it goes back and bigger, much bigger than that. So I think another thing that I want to observe and to caution against is, even in the WTO, we look at healthcare in silos, trading goods, services, intellectual property, trade facilitation. International organization, we have WTO, we have WHO, we have WIPO, and everybody doing things that they are supposed to do. But actually, we should work much better if we look at it and take actions in terms of holistic measures. For me, I don't have time for this first round, but I would just leave it at that one way to address this silo approach is, for me, we can do like a work plan or a master plan for future healthcare development that look at like immediate action, medium term and long term. Immediate action for me is to lock in all the exercise that we have learned from COVID, which I think some of my co-speakers, they will talk about. In trade in goods, they have learned so many things, border trade, tariff, classification, trade facilitation. In intellectual property, we talk about licensing. In services, we talk about how technology can help. So, but these things have to be put together in a way that can be applied to health sector as a whole. So I would rather, I would like to see it, do it in metrics in phase, like HR, human resource development, it can be a horizontal development. So I will just leave it at that, and if I have time, I can come back and elaborate later what I would like to see as a solution for this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you. You have plenty of time, ma'am. I think we have time until
I still have
11.
59 minutes to go, right?
It's a session that we can extend it a bit because we had a shortened opening ceremony and we did the group photo sessions very quickly, you know. So I'm sure that you're going to have the second and the third round, ma'am. So let me try to recap what she just set the scene for us this morning. She talks about 5 mega trends, and they're all very important in terms of being both opportunities and challenges. So we don't look at things in only one side, but actually opportunity, when you have crisis, you also have opportunities, you know. So we should believe in that, the health people and the trade people as well. So the 5 are the possible global pandemics or emerging diseases, possible crises like natural disasters that have been affected by the climate change as well, including the environmental degradation, and all these actually have been addressed in the SDGs, you know. So this one. Second is the fragmentation of international politics. I love the word fragmentation, ma'am. Yeah, geopolitics is difficult to understand, but when you say fragmentation, you see that there is a possibility of not only competition, but confrontation and conflicts, you know, which we don't wish that we're going to see in no time. Third is climate change that affects food security, and I would like to add that it actually affects human security as a whole. So when we talk about health and trade, actually we have to take care of environment and make sure that we have the good surrounding, good enough environment, you know, both in terms of environment surrounding us, animals, plants and all, but also the environment, conducive environment for negotiation. When you are at the WTO, I'm sure that you need that, you know. Fourth is digital and technological transformation. We need to find out how to make sure that we utilize technology and digital advancement to the full and optimize how we can use it in terms of promoting healthcare as well. And last but not least, demographical factor, which means that we are becoming older and older, but we don't die yet. We need to take care of ourselves. And Dr. Sampan just mentioned, you know, during his opening remarks that he is going to live longer and longer because he knows already what factors that will affect his health. So gray and silver economy is mentioned by Ambassador that it's an opportunity for us. Now, let me try to dig deeper. And I think I'll go to the gentleman first, or lady would like to go first. Okay, it's my choice. So I would like to go to Roger and ask him in more detail about your work and your vision on global health and trade and how they interaction with me would be impacting our life of today. And I think with your speciality on the IP, I think you're going to mention about that too. Please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. And let me first start with a warm welcome, also on behalf of the WTO, because I think it's the first time we are co-organizing this conference. And I'm very pleased that this is the case, because this is also an appreciation of the efforts Thailand is making to actually pull the strings together and make sure that trade and health work together. I had prepared slides for my intervention, but I don't want to use them because I think it's putting a straitjacket on me, so I'd rather speak to you freely. And let me sort of start by saying that, of course, the pandemic underscored the critical importance of the interrelatedness of health, trade, and IP policy. And by the way, you won't hear me speaking much about IP in this intervention, because the spectrum is so large that I think I should also touch on the many other sort of work streams at the WTO. So the pandemic taught us that to navigate future challenges in an effective way, we must adopt a more holistic approach. And this is where I just wanted to pick up what you, Ambassador, said. Yes, I think there's a serious problem at the WTO in the sense of working in silos, discussing the issue in different bodies, but those bodies do not communicate with each other. And just recently, as of a couple of days ago, I did actually make the suggestion that we should find co-sponsors among our members to work towards the establishment of a working group on trade and health. Because we do have working groups on other topical issues, we do not have one on trade and health. And Ambassador, you are in Geneva, so you could be maybe heading sort of efforts to work in this direction. Now, let me just say about a few words about the multilateral trading system as is. It does play a vital role in enabling countries to respond effectively to a health crisis. And as we've seen, WTO rules facilitate equitable access to health-related products and services. And this starts with R&D, research and development. It goes through production and ends with bringing medicines, for example, to patients. Global supply chains, as we've seen, have been instrumental in providing access to raw materials, machinery, and finished products. This makes economies, including the developing ones, more resilient in times of future crisis. In 2022, members adopted two key instruments at the WTO. The first one was the Pandemic Declaration. It highlights the WTO's vital role in fostering manufacturing capacity and ensuring equitable access. And I will sort of come back to this in a second. And the second is the Ministerial Declaration, and this is about IP on the TRIPS agreement and COVID-19 vaccines. And the ambassador has suffered from the aftermath of that decision in terms of extending its scope of application beyond vaccines to treatments and diagnostics. What the decision does is it does clarify a number of issues and includes a targeted waiver in order to facilitate production and export of COVID-19 vaccines. Then earlier this year, at the 13th Ministerial Conference, ministers committed to continuing work on the lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic across various WTO councils and committees. And if I have time, I will say a few words about this work. So this mandate is very critical for us as we face multiple global health challenges. Climate change was mentioned here. I would add Mpox, and I will sort of briefly touch on this as well. NCDs, of course, as the biggest cause for global sort of death and sort of diseases. And then antimicrobial resistance also is among those. Now let me start with a few sort of topical issues as we discussed them at the WTO. And the first one is actually human health, climate change, and trade. And you hear me saying this and trade, because what I think we've seen and we are seeing very often is a discussion of the nexus between trade and health or health and environment, but hardly ever do we discuss this triangular configuration of sort of health, climate change, and trade. And this is something which I think needs to develop further. We've made a first step in this direction together with WHO and WIPO colleagues when we organized around this time of the year last year sort of a trilateral symposium on precisely that topic. And the takeaway from this is, I think, that we need to apply the lessons learned also from COVID-19, but first and foremost, make sure that technology transfer is taking place and collaboration between all key stakeholders is ensured. Now, adding to what you said, Ambassador, food security is one of the big challenges coming from climate change. But I was actually reading the Lancet report of last week, and I mean, it's striking when you read that health-related deaths of those over 65 has increased by 167% so since 1990s. So it's a huge figure, and this really confirms that we need to work in this particular area. So this is one, human health, climate change, and trade. The other sort of aspect is new technologies. And we've already heard the ambassador saying how important it is to bridge the digital divide. We need to work on this. But to give you also maybe some food for thought, I think in the IP area, we need to think about new technologies and how they affect the existent sort of patent rights and rights to protect clinical trial data. Because of course, with these new technologies, the time and efforts it requires to come up with clinical trial, for example, will change. And there's also a question of how do we attribute the ownership of what AI uses to come up with. I was reading antibiotics were produced within 2 hours of time by AI because they could just screen the existing material. But then who has actually invented or who has made the first steps which allows AI to explore this is a question. So I think there are many issues in the IP field where new technologies are meant to trigger a discussion among sort of members. The other sort of interesting field for new technologies is supply chains and supply chain resilience. I think really we need to be up to speed in order to address the real challenges, such as data availability, inadequate data aggregation, insufficient digital infrastructures, data confidentiality, and limited international data interoperability. And this is something which is sort of been discussed at the WTO. But we are, I think, still at the initial stages. But with that, I think supply chain resilience can really be see improvements in the future. And final point on new technologies, telehealth. So services is really an important area where if we want to realize the full potential, we need to have robust policies and regulatory frameworks in place so that we can ensure quality of care and patient safety and also data protection. And in order to do so, we have to deal with implementation at domestic level, which is a complex task that requires an integrated approach to technology, infrastructure, and regulatory frameworks. And that becomes even more complicated when we talk about delivering those health services across borders. In terms of lessons learned from, and Chairman, you have to stop me, otherwise I'll use the remaining 46 minutes. Lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic and pandemic preparedness. I've mentioned already the soft declaration which was adopted in 2022 at the ministerial conference. I do believe it offers important insights in terms of the role of the multilateral trading system in pandemic times. And what ministers here have done is actually they've recognized the importance of a stable and predictable trading environment for the manufacture, supply, and distribution of essential medical goods. So that is one. Second, they've recognized the importance of transparency. It's much better if you know what your neighbor is doing in order to ensure, for example, that supply chains are working properly. We've had a long discussion, and this is one of the downsides, I think, at the WTO. Export restrictions was high on the agenda when this declaration was negotiated, but there was no way to agree on not applying those export restrictions anymore. So what we have is an exercise of true restraint commitment in the declaration. Many members have actually adopted trade facilitating measures during the pandemic, and this has also been recognized by the declaration. So we have important examples of how trade can also be facilitated during pandemic times. We've had this discussion and inclusion of the importance of regulatory cooperation, and I'll come back to this when I briefly address MPOX. And so on. So this declaration is a cornerstone for our soft cooperation on pandemic preparedness now. Members have confirmed in this context a forward-looking perspective, so i.e. to build effective solutions so that we are prepared to address future pandemics. But also they've given us, actually as the WTO Secretariat, a mandate to cooperate with other international organizations, in particular the World Health Organization and WIPO. Let me just say a few words about the pandemic agreement, which I think is an important negotiation taking place right now at the days of WHO. It does include a number of trade-related elements, which of course raises questions in terms of how do you make sure that this is coherent with the existing multilateral agreements we have at the WTO. So that there's, I think, some groundwork to do when it comes to the implementation, but this is also where we stand for cooperation with WHO and also WIPO to make sure that this is done in a way which helps everybody. And as somebody said to me last week, yes, the ambitions, I think, in this agreement, in those negotiations, have been watered down, but no matter whether this is the case or not, it's always better to have an agreement on which we can build our future efforts than not to have anything. And maybe I can just, there's so much to say about work in different WTO bodies, but I did want to come to gaps and the way forward, and then I'll come to an end. I wanted to take MPOX as a good case study. Have we learned the lessons from COVID-19? I think not. I mean, I think we still remain unprepared for a new global health crisis, and MPOX in a way is an illustration of that situation right now. Although vaccines exist in this case, access has been restricted by production shortages and regulatory barriers. But at the same time, I think this is also, there's a bit of silver lining in this. So we have an opportunity because of MPOX to clear the roadblocks, as our DG was saying, to the MPOX response. So countries, the lesson to take away from this, countries must be better prepared to receive vaccines, for example, through recognition of regulatory approvals. So it doesn't serve any purpose if a country is not approving an existing vaccine and access by that reason is not given. And we also need to look into diversifying manufacturing capacities, because that was one of the other issues, shortages of supply of vaccines. So there is something to learn from that most recent public health emergency, which also shows that we are not yet there. We need to work more in order to be better prepared for future pandemics. So with that, let me just come to three final points. What I see as positive trends emerging from the ministerial conferences we've had, which did address pandemic preparedness and which can frame the future work, are 3 points. One is convergence on the validity and effectiveness of the essential principles of the multilateral trading system to support the achievement of global health objectives. Second, the recognition of the capacity of the WTO Secretariat to rise to the challenge and contribute constructively to emerging international pandemic preparedness and response. And finally, what I think is the most important, and the ambassador can witness this, the concrete engagement by an increasing number of members in the practicalities and mechanisms for greater distribution of pharmaceutical production capacities and more resilient supply chains, as well as more active use of existing WTO bodies and rules, including also the flexibilities in the TRIPS agreement. This is a very broad brush of all the things I could say, but I hope it gives you an overview of some of the key elements. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was amazing that you try to elaborate further from the first speaker that she mentioned about megatrends, and you also try to lay out the detail of what international trading system is doing right now with the two declarations, the pandemic one and the ministerial that includes the TRIPS and vaccines as well. I'm very convinced, that to have mentioned about more holistic approach that we need, because I'm not involved directly in the WTO process, but I believe that a lot of multilateral frameworks are facing the same challenges of working separately in silo and not cooperating, not integrating the work enough. I've come from the ASEAN perspective, and this is something that the ASEAN Way has to address as well, that we have to work together in a more integrative manner. Now, I think the point about the triangular nexus of the human health, climate change, and trade have to be more and more of our focus of today, and the network, the utilization of technology. You mentioned that, and that is a challenge of the increasing use of AI on the IP, on the database. So we need to strengthen our supply chain, make it more resilient. That's what you mentioned as well. And in fact, this year, a theme of the Laos Chairmanship of the ASEAN is working on supply chain resilience. So we have to do that in tandem with what's happening at the global level in the WTO process as well. You mentioned both the hardware and the software, the infrastructure, and also the regulatory framework. And we need to collaborate more on that. You mentioned a lot of things. At the end, we need the convergence of multilateralism. We still need that. We need to recognize the capacity of the WTO Secretariat. I think Ambassador can comment more on that as well. And the last but not least is that we need more people to help one another. We need more number of members in terms of making sure the practicality is there. So that's amazing from the WTO side. Now we move to the WHO side. And I think she has much to say about the balance between the trade and help, and also on regulation. I think you mentioned that with me this morning, that you had to focus on that. So please, Dr. Manisha, it's your turn to
Thank you, Suvit, and I thank Chaim for inviting me for this panel. And it's always a pleasure when you're moderating. I think this is the third time we are together. Dr. Suvit, in the beginning, I was always wondering that you share the name with the elder Dr. Suvit, and you're probably following in his footsteps.
Nothing to compare.
So I thought I'll make 3 points due to the time that we have. And the first thing is that if any of us had any doubt that trade is something that is important, but health is even more important, that was starkly visible during COVID-19. We all had economies growing at so many different levels, but after COVID-19, we are all facing the aftermath of what happens when health is not in place. And Roger just mentioned the MPOX and many issues that we still have to battle with. Sometimes it is good to look back a little in time and see how things developed. And if we look at the formation of the WHO, in fact, it was before that in the League of Nations, when we had the Health Committee and the Malaria Committee, which was formed because the Rockefeller Group was actually exploiting the mines in Latin America and across the world. And they were at that time dealing with malaria as a crisis. In fact, it's a bit humbling that after so many years, more than 70 years now, we are still not able to win our battle against that tiny mosquito. Malaria still exists. But the fact is that we had these 2 health committees which were formed. And then when WHO was formed, these 2 in the United Nations system after the World War, in 1948, these 2 committees metamorphosed and we had the WHO. So in fact, the trade recognized long time ago that we need health in order to succeed. And I think this needs to be absolutely very clear. My personal view is that sometimes trade looks at short-term gains, and which is why the long-term gains of having good health get neglected. But when we are looking at health, we owe it to our future generations to look at a long-term perspective. And that is why I think this balance between trade and health is extremely critical, and which is why we are all here gathered to make sure that that happens. In fact, a lot of our discussion on intellectual property rights and trade gets focused on patents. And that is rightly so, because patents is the most stringent and important of the intellectual property rights. But very early on, when WHO was formed, one of the first resolutions, I think it was WHA 3.16 or something like that, they were looking at international non-proprietary names of medicines and pharmaceutical products. So that, and this comes under the purview of the trademarks aspect of the intellectual property rights. So the idea was that when a particular pharmaceutical product or medicine moves across borders, it is understood in the right perspective. Until today, WHO publishes those, the additional names, and they are circulated through our ministry focal points every year. So this work has been recognized, and I think we need to bring about this balance, and this is where the international trade and health engagement by Thailand is very critical. To my mind, there is no other such conference organized anywhere in the world, and for that, I think Thailand has, and the Dr. Suvid, Dr. Viroj, and others who have worked in this have a great deal to be, you know, the world needs to be thankful to have a conference where these things are discussed, and we are coming together to look at some of these difficult issues. The second point which I thought I would like to tell and talk about is, you know, the science is absolutely fascinating. If you look at what is happening today in terms of where science is going, and especially with the CRISPR technologies, and you can slash DNA patents, and you look at the patents that are being taken out in the US Patent and Trademark Office database, they are not yet anywhere close to manufacturing. We still have maybe another 10 or 15 years to go, but you mentioned AI. We do not know how AI is going to change that. But the science is absolutely fascinating. If you can, viruses, we are now negotiating the pandemic treaty for viruses, but viruses are also being seen as a delivery mechanism for new genetic material. So just to think about it it looks like science fiction today, but I'm also part of the advisory committee on the Convention on Biodiversity in India, where they are looking at negotiating the access and benefit sharing mechanisms and other objectives under the CBD agreement. In fact, in November and December, there is a big COP taking place where they are going to discuss many of these issues related to genetic data. Incidentally, we call it in the pandemic treating the genetic sequencing data, but there they are looking at digital sequence information, and it's really at which level the proteins are, or whether you go below that at the the different components of the genetic material. So this is something of the debate. But what is very interesting when I mentioned about the sciences, some of this CRISPR technologies, when you introduce the DNA, some of it was, normally when we have inheritance, it is by selection. But in this case, almost 5 generations later, that gene does appear. So it could be very fascinating that you are actually vaccinated with some kind of a product developed from viruses or otherwise, and a person who has autism gets a fever for 3 days or 4 days and then completely recovers and doesn't have the genetic disease anymore. This is where the researchers are working forward, and the marine biology is even more exciting when I attend some of these meetings, because the researchers are there. In this context, what I wish to mention, and I would like to bring it on board, is that we need to look at regulation of what is going to happen in this in the future. Many of it is very good, but we want to see how this regulation of the new science also is coming up. it was mentioned the regulation of the existing products which we are not able to get to the people. There, of course, as you can see in COVID-19, we actually had the roll-on review, which was started by the US FDA. You know that vaccines take almost 10 to 12 years before they reach populations, but in COVID-19, we were able to do it in 2 years, less than 2 years. That is because the US FDA started the roll-on review. We were not completely clear with clinical trials 1, but once there was something promising, we went into 2. And once there was something promising coming, we went into clinical trials 3, and that's how we got the rollout of the vaccines. So regulation has responded where it needs to respond to a crisis. And I think we need to have that debate right now for the new technologies that we are developing in science, particularly with respect to the DNA and RNA or proteomics. Which level are we going, and what are the implications to public health? And I think this is a very rich area where we can look at it as to how it can be most beneficial in the long run. Also, I think we mentioned international collaboration. There is a need to look at international collaboration with our other agencies. To my mind, apart from the CBD, even the UNESCO is working on some of these areas when they look at traditional knowledge systems. And I think some of this needs to be brought on board right now so that we are not handling something tomorrow, if we can have the preparatory work done today. And I think Her Excellency also mentioned digital platforms, and AI was also mentioned. If this will speed up the rate at which we are going to get these new technologies across and new products, I think we need to really have a look at that. And my third point, which I thought I would like to state, is that, you know, we are, and this I'm speaking my personal views, we are negotiating this pandemic treaty, and a lot of work has been going on this. I think we are actually trying in the WHO to have something similar to the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which is the FCTC, which was negotiated a number of years ago for tobacco products. And I think we need to bring on board that a pandemic is not akin to a tobacco product. A pandemic, we need something nimble, we need something swift that can respond. And WHO did very good work when we looked at COVAX. And I think the treaty could be made a little lighter by having a mechanism to bring people on board rather than addressing all the forms that need to go into the pandemic. Because, you know, we cannot have so much detail as we are trying to do in the treaty because we don't know what the pandemic will expect of us. And I think that would be very useful if we could do that. But what the pandemic treaty would do a big service is to have a very dedicated financial contribution and a resource mechanism which sits like a bank. So if there is a problem, there should not be shortage of any resources to draw in and to make sure that we are able to put the things in place. I think all of us are aware that the international health regulations were actually meant for this purpose. We actually have a detailed session next session CHIME has designed for the pandemic treaty, so I should not be kind of overstepping on what may come about in that discussion. But I do think that IHR had a certain role to play, and some of it didn't work. But we need to parse out what IHR would do and what the pandemic treaty can do. And it would be very useful to have a treaty where there is a definitive obligation. But we do, as I said earlier, if it was made a little, made a little lighter and nimble, to address pandemics, I think that would be very useful. So for the first round, Suvit, I thought this would, these are some of the points I would like to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manisha. So that was the perspective from the WHO. Of course, you mentioned firstly the balance between trade and health, and it is important to think of the long-term gain rather than short-term gain. I'm not sure whether the final speaker of ours would agree with that, or he has a different perspective. Well, we're going to hear from the private sector's view in a minute. Now, the second point is very important. You're talking about science, which is very fascinating, and we don't know where it's going. and it can do a lot in the future. So whether it's a fiction or a fact, but for sure, science, it's our future. It's what we have to focus on and make sure that R&D is for the benefit of the humankind. Last but not least, you gave the personal view, but I think it's very valid when you talk about the pandemic treaty that needs to be a general framework. We cannot go into the specific. I have been through a lot of negotiations myself, especially in the ASEAN related frameworks, and it's so difficult right now with the geopolitics, fragmentation of thoughts and views, and maybe ideologies come in sometimes, you know, and we need to make sure that we go for the holistic approach and make sure that we have the general framework that within which we can work together. So international cooperation, collaboration, and also multilateralism would be preserved, and we can enjoy the benefits of that as well. Last but not least, in your third point, you mentioned about the resource mechanism. We need the finance. We need something that we can continue our good work together, and this is something that we should focus on as well with the world that full of competition right now, and there are wars happening around the world as well. So we need to spend on those or not, rather than the health, the long-term gain that we need. So let me now turn to the last speaker, and it's going to be your first round, sir. So you have more time afterwards as well. Sorry. Mr. Prong, is that the correct pronunciation?
Yeah, like a prong dong, you know, prong.
Oh, prong dong, that means harmony. That means we sit together and we work together as one panel, right? So I'm sure that you're going to support a lot of points that the previous speakers have been saying, but you have all the right to mention anything that you think that will be in contradiction as well, just in case the private sector has something of otherwise, you know. So I give the floor to you, and please enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank Khun Jae-em, thank Dr. Samphan for inviting me. I have the slide that actually you can show it easier to capture the key one. But anyhow, let me start with a few things that it remind me of the. One of the things that, you know, once you go back to like the session like this, we do the video and then the WHO, it remind me of my father. Because my father worked for the United Nations, the UNDP, for 35 years. The time that when China opened the countries, when Pakistan started, when Bangladesh started, Afghanistan, and then that time is not as complicated as this time, right? You can go in with good intentions of the United Nations to develop something. But nowadays, there are a lot of things that very complicated, right? So very complicated. From the private sector, this I would like to share with you. I think we talk about a lot of policy, we talk about of the challenges we have. My perspective is that I would like to show the reciprocal from those policy upon private sectors, okay, so that you can have more like a challenge and anything that you can see. Let me separate into two groups. The first one is very general, so like this is what we see, and as the personal and the private sectors, and the second part as the private sector, how we deal with it. Right? We talk about the trade barrier, we talk about the health issues, we talk about the climate change, but as the private sector, we have to deal with all of those. Right? And then still have to grow the company. That is challenge we have. I work for the company named Lumentum. Lumentum is the multinational company. The headquarters is in the US. We are the producer of the communications infrastructures. Right? When you talk about that, connecting the world together, that is the backbone of the equipment is there. And also we are entering into what we call AI right now, infrastructure. So we will talk about that a little bit. Yeah. Before going to this, I will give you an example. We touch on the COVID as a good example. I will reflect what happened during those times in the COVID. Right? As the telecommunication infrastructures. During the COVID hit the world, in the US, they already define this kind of the technology as the infrastructure for the world. So it cannot stop. It can stop growing. You think about, if you look at the Netflix, stay home, look at the Netflix that time. If you notice, the Netflix start to drop the resolutions from high definition to be 480 right away during the time of COVID. Mainly because a lot of people stay home and the bandwidth of the world cannot afford it. That is why we as a company has been get exceptional to run the operation during the COVID time. Right? So that is the infrastructure. The challenge is that the main manufacturing site is in Thailand. Right? So we have the help that we want to protect our employees, and we have the infrastructures that need to enable the whole world. Right? So how can we deal with those complications? That is very challenging. Right? Our operation in Thailand never have a single day to shut down because of the COVID. We have to work a lot with the government to ensure that we show that how we prevent and protect the employees. But at the same time, we also need to tell to a customer and the other that we also keep producing to serve the world so that people can still connect during the COVID time. So that is a challenging that we have. Right? And I give example that during those times, I recall that the corporate headquarters be able to access the vaccine. But they want to put into the factory in Thailand. We have about 3,000 people here. And that is a challenge. Right? We want to run here from Thailand, but at the same time, we want to serve the world in terms of infrastructure. They'll be able to access the vaccine, but we cannot get it because of the thing that preventing us to doing those. There are a lot of challenges during those times that we have to go through. Right? So this is an example of the COVID time that we face as the corporation. Right? Trade and health truly impact each other for sure, and climate definitely. I will talk about that later on. But the wider impact is for the indirect impact to it. Right? I want to focus more on indirect impact. Right? The ambassador already mentioned about the agriculture, the food that will have the impact. The IP, the trade barrier, also the impact. We start to see the standard and regulations, not only for the food itself, from the climate change, from the well-being of the people. We start to see that regulation and standard put upon the service sector or the private sector like us. Right? The labor standard and the restriction of the trade in the low-wage section. The example is that we have to, as a company, we comply to the called RBA, right? This is like take good care of our people. But of course, in terms of the efficiency and the cost, it will go up. Comparing to the other competitor, which they don't care and they don't need to care, how can you compete with them? That is a challenge of the combination of trade, combination of health, and also a combination of the climate. Right? I go to the next one. There's an example. Right? This is definitely already known about the direct impact. We talk about the HIV, that we got the compulsory license for the extension HIV. We talk about the COVID thing that government also temporarily reduced or waived the tariff. And also indirect impact is like the right export that we cannot compete much, and you have the subsidiary of the countries, or even the environmental and the regulation of the food export will lower the competitiveness that we have. Right? One of the things I would like to share as the general private sector is that it still have a chance as a win-win between trade and between the health. Right? Think about, I think Khun Sampan also mentioned about this one. There are the tariff, but you can specify the target tariff on the health harming product. Right? Don't need to be one size fit all, but we segment it. Right? You might do it on the sugary drinks. Definitely it will affect your health. Right? That is another way that you can do. The second one is that the regional trade agreement for health resilience. Right? We see a lot of production facility. The technology has been developed in European countries. The factory could be in India or the factory could be in South America. How can we manipulate the whole thing without violating the trade agreement, without violating the health promotions? Because now the world is the world. You cannot tell that the climate change from one country only limited to that country. Right? It could limit to other country right away. I think this morning, a couple of days ago, in Thailand, the CP groups already identified that they will put the DNA upon the crops. If it has been proved and come from other country, and it is using the fire to do the farming, they will ban from it. Right. The third one is the flexibility of cost and phase standard. Right. In some time during the crisis, you have to reduce the barrier. And the last one or the big picture is the digital health services. Digital health services is found that very helpful now. The company like us, we also promote the mental health. And you can see that you can do the consultation over the internet with anyone, with any person in the world. So that is what we start to see it come, especially the AI coming in. Sometimes we never know exactly that whether or not we talk to people or we talk to the AI, the kind of the type of the people. I tried this one interestingly. I like ChatGPT, that I play with ChatGPT a lot. In the past, I believe that ChatGPT cannot do two things. One is poetry. Another one is the psychologies. And a month ago, I already changed my mind. You can put to you can go to the ChatGPT. You have the ask them. They call it the prompt engineer. Prompt engineer has been the way that you syntax the command. You can generate the poetry, the poems, in English, then translate, and you can tell them that let it have the flavor of Sunthornpu flavor. And they will amazingly generate the poem that you don't know that this is the AI generated. And the second one is that we start to ask the question about psychology, like love, sympathy, and you start to do, they call it prompt engineer, talk to the AI. And they will diagnose you like a psychiatrist. Very interesting. I encourage you to try. Right? So this one is coming. My last point as the private sector, I want to spend like 5 minutes here. In terms of private sector, when we want to deal with the trade, with the health, and with the climate, we need to engage with the corporate social responsibility programs. Right. The second one is that we also need to adopt international health, safety, climate standard into our operations. Right. I give example. This is our approach as Lumentum. Right. And maybe this is something that you can see that how we translate from the policy level into the actions. Right. We approach sustainability by pick the sustainability development goal from the UN. As Lumentum, we pick 7 to drive. Right? We pick like gender equality, affordable, and the clean energy, so on and so forth, until the climate actions. When we deploy it, it's clearly that we put into 3 groups. The first group is whatever we want to do, we do for the planet. Lighter impact, which just means that we have to use less energy, consume less, reduce the greenhouse gas, and also don't generate waste as the operation. So renewable energy is also another one that we focus a lot. The second group, we talk about the people, right? Planet people. People is talk about the ethics. We talk about the safety. We talk about the cultures. We talk about like communities, how we learn together. And the last point is innovations. And this is something when we adopt the way from the policy into the innovations. Every product that we design need to use the total energy to produce it less than previous generations. Right? You cannot allow to have the new product design, even the very advanced, to use or to consume more energy. We have to use less and less energies for the new designs that become. Right? And this is an example of what we do. We do a lot of we set the net zero greenhouse gas emissions. We talk about the greenhouse gas intensity. We use a lot of renewable, like in Thailand factory, we are 100% renewable energies that we use. And from the deployment, I will stop here to show that the way we deployment is that from the UN sustainability goal become the scope that we focus people, planet, innovation. And we have a very clear measurement of what we do. Right? That is the way that private sectors try to help the world from this perspective. So let me stop here so that I can go for the next round.
Thank you, thank you. I think the private sector can save the world as well and work together with the public sector. That was really fascinating talk. As you mentioned that your dad also worked for the multilateral framework as big as the UN, and he found things very complicated. But nowadays, it's even more complicated, right? With the VUCA world that we have, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Right now, I thought that we had a lot of time, but I'm going to ignore these numbers that keep getting less and less, because we actually have until 11, right? So we still have time for the second round. And I'm sure that there are some questions from the floor that might want to be asked to the panelists as well. But before that, I think your point about the win-win cooperation at the end is very important. And I have another word for win-win, is win-all. You know, you have to take care of the environment. And sometimes when we think about win-win, we talk about people dealing with one another, but you forget about the environment as well. And you have proposed a lot of approaches like targeted tariff, regional trade agreements, flexibility courses or phased standards, and digital health services as well. Your CSR program has 3 pillars on planet, people, and innovation towards sustainability in all dimensions. And I think it's key that we have a partnership, which is the last SDG, but it's very important, and probably the most important SDG. We need the partnership between the private and public sectors and all other sectors as well. Now, for the second round, I will start with the First Lady and the Ambassador from Geneva. I think she has a lot more to say. I give you about 5 to 10 minutes on the areas of priorities that we can work together in the future so that we can set the scene for the next session as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for my co-speakers. Very fascinating indeed. I think in the interest of time, I would like to share another set of issues that I would like to propose Dr. Suwit, Dr. Samphan, and Dr. Shaem to consider in the future tasks for the the conference. For me, yes, I'm a trade person, but working in Geneva as ambassador has afforded me a great opportunity to see everything from a holistic approach. My officers in Geneva, of course, we are divided into goods, people, services, IP, trade facilitation, we have WIPO people, we have WTO people, but everything has to come to ambassador. So before I came here, they all sent everything to me to read again. So I could clearly see that actually there are a lot of overlapping points that are being discussed in either a sub-organization, a forum, or even across organizations. So I think it is, for me, is more encouraging. I think Roger said that we have not learned much from COVID. I think that we have not learned much, but at least we have identified all the pain points and the things that could be improved if another a pandemic or crisis hit us again. For me, I approach health sector issue as well as trade and health in 3A principle that we hear often in Geneva. The 3 A's are availability, accessibility, and affordability. So these are important, but for me, it's not only between the government and the patients or the consumers, but also for the private sector as well. Everybody has to work together to achieve these 3 A's in public health. And I think for me, there are 6 areas that colleagues in the public health and trade or even the private sector can consider. The first thing I think we can consolidate all the lessons learned from COVID, which is quite a lot. Very detailed. If you look at reports from the trade in goods and trade facilitation, they are quite detailed on what they can do, you know, like tariff classification, so goods enter quickly. The border clearance that customs can adopt when crisis hit. Clearance of health personnel, not only the researchers, but like let's say you have to fly in some technician to help with a vaccine factory, that kind of stuff. This has been identified. Another thing that I think that we can do to consolidate all the issues, like it was like the voluntary licensing agreement. We can learn and discuss more on the pros and the cons of what they provide as a vehicle to address the pandemic issue. The access to technology, this is very vital, and it is, you know, transport technology and access to technology is being discussed a lot at the WTO, but again, separately, and so far not much progress has been made, but we have recognized that this is an important issue. So I think the first thing that we should do is to consolidate and amalgamate all these lessons learned from different bodies and put it up like a manual or something that members can do. The second thing that I think we can undertake is what I would call the policy alignment, which is the regulation and standard that Kun Prong just talked about. There are a lot of policy and measures related to health sector. And again, once again, for me, I do not wish to look at health only in response to pandemic. Health is so much bigger, so important for the well-being. And there are things like SPS, which is a sanitary measures. There are, you know, regulation. Dr. Manisha mentioned about the FDA approval for vaccine, either in terms of emergency or not emergency. We should start discussing in earnest what are these things that countries can do and align their policies together. I'm using the word align because I think this is an area where you cannot harmonize. It's very difficult. Nobody is gonna give up 100%, but at least we should discuss and have transparency, who's doing what and what kind of criteria. Is there any similarity? And we do it in a similar way. The third area that I think we can consider is what I call the multi-stakeholder partnership. At first, I was thinking only of the international organization, but we have the tripartite, WTO, WIPO, WHO. We talk about this together, but we have other stakeholders. We have civil society, we have the consumers group, we have the private sector, of course. So I think we should have a more regular discussion in the multi-stakeholder partnership to at least, again, keep things transparent, know who's doing what, and try to work together. The fourth thing is the, I think data sharing is very important. When in COVID, we have learned that there are data, which I will be speaking about this tomorrow. I have another session on data. But I think this is something that can also be, you know, coherence, data coherence, or at least data sharing, and see what we can work together in terms of multinational or even regional data. I'm almost finished. Fifth one is the technology. And technology area, I think even for us today, you can hear that we have different views and experiences regarding technology in health. But this is important area, and from my perspective, it is there are many opportunities as well. But we have to address things like access to technology, and also even the technology a gap. We don't have sufficient, and also maybe we can add that into like financial access. So there are things that are emerging, but developing countries do not have proper access, or things that we can discuss. And technology in terms of IP, patent and that kind of thing as well. Last but not least, I think capacity building or human resource development and training. These are vital areas for the future of healthcare sector very much. And this can be done, again, not only in terms of researchers or technicians for the lab for COVID vaccine, but broader, like nurses. You can have carer, for the aging economy that I was mentioning. So in this part, don't forget the services sector, which is a big part of healthcare industry. Of course, we have intellectual property. We talk about patent, medicine, but we also have trading goods, pharmaceutical product, medical devices. We have services, and which is a great potential for developing countries. So HR can bind all together, and I think capacity building is something we can also do from regional as well as multilateral. So these are my 6 areas of proposed things that we can consider doing in the future to address healthcare, and we can do it in like a master plan or something. Thank you.
Great, and I think she has more to be continued tomorrow. But before we give the floor to the participants for question and answers, anyone would like to add to the 5 to 6 priority areas? Roger?
Yes, I won't beat the ambassador. I only have 4 points to add. But I just very briefly, one is you mentioned voluntary licensing, and indeed I think this is a very important area because we have a lot of talk these days about tech transfer and manufacturing capacities, and it's very closely related to each other. What I think is very important in this context is a very simple message. Much of this has been built during the pandemic, and we need to be sort of recognition of what has been built and not lose what is already there in terms of voluntary collaboration. That is one. The second is I think there's very sort of useful work ongoing in collaboration. You mentioned collaboration with the World Customs Organization in terms of classification of essential goods, and which will help countries to identify what are those essential goods, and also have classifications in terms of tariffs, which would allow to be much more effective in terms of reaction to future crisis situations. So the third point is about, I think we need a reflection about very specific point, but very important, transportation costs. Because if you take, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you take a batch of generic medicines, the value is very low compared to, say, iPhones. So if you're competing with the manufacturers of iPhones for transportation facilities during a pandemic time, you may find it very hard and very difficult in terms of costs. Which do not match the value of your own products. So we need to find ways to ensure that transportation can take place and is not put aside because other goods which are of higher value are given priority. Last point, which I think is the most important one for me, that there has been much discussion, and that term was used during the pandemic, clearinghouses. What does it mean? I think we could have a useful discussion in 2 ways about clearinghouse mechanisms. One is about supply chains. If we had a better idea in terms of what is produced where are bottlenecks in the international supply chains. That actually would be a great deal forward in terms of ensuring access to what can be manufactured, but also in terms of ensuring access to sort of active ingredients. For example, if you're manufacturing and you know that somebody is sitting on stocks which you need, so if we had that transparency established somewhere, would be very helpful. And likewise, I think a clearinghouse mechanism would be extremely helpful when it comes to building manufacturing capacities, diversifying manufacturing capacities. Why? Because I don't know if you share this feeling. If you ask me today, what are the initiatives out there to support manufacturing capacities? Yes, there are tons of initiatives, but who is actually taking care of coordinating, making sure that those are responding to each other and complement each other? I think there's very little out there to ensure this, and there again, I mean, you call it clearinghouse mechanism or something else, but a mechanism which would allow greater sort of coordination of initiatives to diversify manufacturing capacities, I think would be of extremely sort of helpful in this context. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay, we have had 6 plus 4, so already 10 points. You want to make it a dozen? One each? Dr. Manisha, you have anything from the health side? Please. Okay, please.
So to answer Suvit, one point, well, I think one of the things that we need to, this is future work for us, Chaim, as we move forward, and Dr. Sampan. I think advertisement across borders needs to be addressed in terms of the trade and health area, particularly in respect of the NCDs. We have looked at advertisement in the context of tobacco, and a lot of work has been done in that area. But we haven't seen how the mechanism works for some of the other aspects of communication for buying products like sugary and sweet products over, to encourage consumers for the right behaviors. And in this context, I do want to mention that we need to be sensitive to our cultural norms. Because sometimes, I remember we were having the Formula One races and there was an advertisement saying no alcohol and everybody was celebrating with champagne. So it won't work if, I mean, so moderation and balance is the key. And we need to do it in context of our own cultural norms as well. And I think, I don't know how one will communicate the message, but we do need to say that an occasional a very sweet, sugary drink is fine, but just don't make it a lifestyle. To answer what Dr. Sampan had mentioned in his opening remarks, that he was filling in all the points and seeing how long he's going to live. So I think we need some more work in this area to give the right kind of messages in terms of the trade and health interface. Yes. Over to you.
Very good point on the NCDs, and I think moderation and balance, moderation and balance are keywords here. And I believe that maybe for the next conference, you can add culture to the trade and health as well. That is a very important element. Anything you want to leave as the last word?
Not add the note, but just maybe some of the either item number 0 or underline that one. But one thing is like you need to recognize that the technology is go very fast. And you'll be faster and faster, right? I'm in the technology sectors, the one that go very fast, right? One of the things that we, as a citizens of the world, we are worried is that you start to see the separation between the one who capable, even the country that's capable, but the one that's still left behind. The gap will be wider and wider. I think that is the challenge that we are going to have very soon. The second one is that we need to have the fundamental researching. I think in any regard. A lot of the time now, when we talk about research, the new thing, innovation, many think about the commercials at the beginning. Right? maybe we lacking of like the focus that we do this for the world, for the people. Now you start to talk about commercial life first or get a lot of money, and you start to see the trend of the people going to these directions. How can we step back and then be able to pull it into the right balance? And the third one, Roger already mentioned about to have the policy, policy is a good driven, but the operational part, that is what you can learn. I think from the private sector, they deal with a lot of the operational, right? In terms of the supply chain, selections, the transparency, transportations, that is operational. If you be able to blend between policy and the operational, enable the operation also be part of the policy that enable each other, it will go very effective for implementation. So that is my remark that I would like to leave.
Thank you so much. Your point about digital divide and technological divide, and it's going really fast, making the gaps wider, very worrying actually, because the divide in terms of technology can imply that we have the more division among the people. Can I give 5 minutes to the floor, to the participants? If any pressing questions can come up. We're facing dilemma because of my fault, so please blame me if we're running over the coffee time. Please.
Good morning. My name is Chalamsak Kittitakun from Thai Network of People Living with HIV and AIDS. We are the civil society organization. Thank you for the speaker, give us some thoughts and also lessons learned out of the pandemic that just happened. But actually, I have some comment as well regarding the lesson learned that you are talking about. I don't think that we learn much out of this. Now, when the pandemic when the COVID-19 pandemic is over, it's become back to the business as usual, particularly in aspect of intellectual property. The reason I say so is, firstly, no one talking about TRIPS waiver proposal at all. It has been killed and has been failed already. Secondly, FTA negotiations come back again, and all the proposal is about TRIPS plus provision that proposed to many developing countries, including Thailand, particularly the one that we are negotiating with the EU. And my question is that, what do you think about the TRIPS waiver proposal? And what is your comments to overcome the intellectual property barrier if we had the pandemic happen again, to ensure that people can access to vaccine, medicine, and health technology in time, not wait until the negotiation in the WTO or WHO has been take a long time, and also have to negotiate with the big pharma for get the voluntary licensing. Life of people cannot wait that long. Thank you.
Okay, so the comment is that we haven't done enough. We haven't managed very well, and he raised the issue of TRIPS and IP. So anyone would like to respond to that? Any other questions first, so we can answer together? It looks like there is only one question for this one. So would you like to volunteer, madam? I always go for the ambassador when I get...
Of course I can address that. I'm not sure whether I should wear ambassador's hat or not. Just take it off and make my personal comment. Roger, you want to go first?
Well, I mean, I can say a few words about this. As you know, I mean, we have, well, what people commonly call a TRIPS waiver, which I think is not the right denomination for what was sort of adopted at the ministerial conference. What I think many people do underestimate, in my personal view, is the importance not so much of the waiver element in that decision, but of the clarifications, which it also includes. And those clarifications may actually survive the lifetime of that decision. And if you look, just to give you one example, into the clarification about clinical trial data, and that they should not stand in the way of approving vaccines in this case, is a very important question which is addressed here. So I think the waiver sort of decision, as you called it, is there and serves a purpose. But beyond this, I mean, I've done recently with colleagues some research in terms of implementation of existing flexibilities. And yes, it's always nice to call for more, but as a result of that research, I must say it's striking me that many countries are not even implementing what is possible today under the existing sort of agreement. So as always in international negotiations, putting into place something different requires a lot of efforts and takes a lot of time. Here we have policy options in the TRIPS agreement of which not all countries are making full sort of use in terms of implementation. So I would sort of see this as the very first step. Make sure that your legal framework domestically is responsive to public health objectives on the basis of what is possible today. Thank you.
It's a very good point, because sometimes when we have the policy, we have the legal framework, but at the operational level, implementation is very key. It's like when, you know, I'm right now involved in the process of enacting the new law on the transboundary haze. It's so difficult to see how the practicality will come in, and the law enforcement will be, because we will be one of the first in the region to have a Clean Air Act. Anyway, I think if you have anything to add, Madame, last words from Ambassador before.
Well, I just want to address that the issues that have been raised by the representative of the civil society is, of course, very important, and everybody who are involved in the not only the IP areas but all the you know, government policy makers are very well aware. Of course, we do not see access to. No, we see our duty to protect life and health are very important, and I can assure you that we are trying our best. But it can't be helped that these issues are also important trade negotiating issues, and so that we have to be able to negotiate if there are trade-related aspects. But what I want to say from my view on this issue, because I was the chair of the TRIPS Council that discussed a lot about the extension of the TRIPS. Okay, I'm sorry, Roger, the TRIPS waiver to cover diagnostics and therapeutics. What I discovered as my personal experience for the whole year was that I think domestic capacity building is very important. No matter what international regulation you have, if you don't have the capacity in your own country to use it, then it's negotiating for what? I would just say like that. And I'm giving you example of Thailand ourselves. We have seen the experience of bioscience in collaboration with AstraZeneca. And we also, there was a couple of examples sent to me before I came here about LDC's country and some Pacific Island country experience in dealing with COVID. So for me, the reason I was talking a lot about capacity building, personnel or others, is because the rules, they are out there. If you can or cannot use it, it depends on what you have in your own country. If you have the rules, but you don't have researchers who can do that, you don't have like in examples of Thailand, we don't have along the whole supply chain of vaccine, we don't have everything. We have some. So if in the future something happen like this, we have to be able to have sufficient support from domestic supply chain. So I just want to end my note here that I'm very glad that like Dr. Manisha said, that we always have this conversation about trade and health and in other relations every year, so we can catch up and see things in a broad manner. Because at the end of the day, we have a lot of homework to do within our house as well, and but it is it's good to know what is going on around the world, but we should not forget to make ourselves stronger. So that is my view from this. Thank you.
Thank you. We still have a lot of sessions coming up, and I think the first session already set the groundwork for the next sessions. And I think we have to give a round of applause to all these distinguished speakers. Let me end this session with this keyword of partnership. I think partnership is important at international level as well as in the domestic level. And I'm from the foreign affairs, so I would say that foreign policy begins at home. And every time that we think about trying to pursue anything outside the country, we have to get our house in order. So let me leave with these last words, and thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the panelists and the moderators. And this is a session one which gives us the background of trade and health and current future. This is also one of the informative sessions that we got the chance to explore the current trade issues, and also we had discussed the lesson learned from the COVID-19 3 years ago. Before we begin the session 2, we will have a short coffee break for 15 minutes. We have already prepared the break right in front of the conference room. Please come back at 11:15. See you. Thank you. Thank you, Manisha.